Hi, everyone. I'm Matthew DeSantis,
And I'm Kaylie Shapiro.
and welcome to another episode on NYRA Bet's YouTube to the road to the Kentucky Derby.
And the Kentucky Oaks.
Well, hey, everyone. Welcome to a Monday recap of what was a very eventful weekend on the road to the Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks. I'm joined by my trusted colleague, Kaylie Shapiro. But before we get to Kaylie, just want to remind all of you to press that like button and subscribe on NYRA Bet's YouTube today. Subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos drop on the channel. We have these sorts of programs around the Derby and Oaks. We also have weekly race previews, full card analyses, handicapping and betting tutorials, and so much more. So press that like and subscribe button today. Well, Kaylie, it was a massive week of preps on both sides for the boys and the girls. I don't know if you've even caught your breath yet from the Fountain of Youth, but it was quite a weekend.
Yeah, it was such a great weekend. And no, I definitely have not yet. I mean, just kidding. But yeah, it was definitely a really great weekend of preps. I mean, obviously, the Fountain of Youth was the one I was most excited for the result for. But I mean, Drexel Hill, I mean, that was one filly that we touched on a ton the week
Yeah,
prior that we thought was a real win candidate. It's a shame I didn't put her on top, but that horse ran a really good race with the blinkers coming off.
yeah.
And yeah, there were definitely lots of impressive performances out in Santa Anita as well. So
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was really just kind of great at race after great race after great race on Saturday and then even into Sunday for the Santa Ysabel, which we will get into. And so, listen, if this is your first time joining us, welcome. And what we're going to do is just kind of recap some of the big races from this weekend, talk through some of the results, and analyze what happened in some of these races, some of the things we expected, some of the things maybe that surprised us, etc. We're going to start up here at Aqueduct, though, and then we're going to go to Gulfstream Park and then Santa Anita. And then at the end, we're going to share our new Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks top 10 list and talk a little bit about some of the upcoming preps that we have on both sides for the fillies and the Colts. So up here in New York, though, we are going to start with the fillies and the Busher Invitational. You mentioned Drexel Hill. This is a horse that came up from Fairgrounds for Whit Beckman. Jockey Ben Curtis made the trip up from Louisiana as well. I heard Maggie Wolfendale in the paddock say he always said he wanted to win a race at Aqueduct. Well, he ended up doing it in this particular race, and a really thrilling stretch run because he didn't go around. He went between two really game horses coming down the stretch in Volleyball Princess and Amarth, who was a pretty big long shot for McKenzie. So interesting race here, though, and big effort by Drexel Hill.
yeah, I thought Drexel Hill put in a really big effort there. I mean, she ran a 79 by her speed figure for that effort. So obviously not really the same up to par with maybe some of the other figures that we've seen from this group, but I thought that she put in a really good effort. And I mean, I expect her to probably improve a bit more. That was her first time. She got the blinkers off there. So,
Yeah.
she's run without them before, but clearly something really clicked for her in between her last race and this one. And I'd like to see her improve some more for sure. But yeah, that's a horse that, put in a really good race. And I'm excited to see her run in the Oaks if, she's in the starting gate that day. But yeah, I thought she put in a really good effort. And I really like that McKenzie filly that got second as well. She wasn't one
Yeah.
of the ones that I had my eye really on too heavily there. But, when I feel like everyone does this as a handicapper when a horse,
Yeah.
puts a performance on like that and you go through and you're like, how did I miss this? I mean, pretty sure
Yeah.
she broke her maiden at Keeneland. And then as I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking at the pedigree, under the third dam is like distorted humor, no big deal or anything. So clearly that, she has some pedigree on her. And I really like the McKinseys.
Yeah.
And, maybe she improves off of that as well as we see McKenzie, was obviously very precocious, but got better with age as well. So maybe we see
Yeah.
some of those similarities in her as well.
Absolutely. No, I thought an impressive performance there from Drexel Hill. Whit Beckman's got a lot of good fillies this year. Of course, he kind of learned a little bit about the Triple Crown Trail last year with Honor Marie and just kind of learned a little bit more about managing all of his horses this year. And he's got quite a few between Her Laugh and a couple of others. So, he's got some nice runners on the filly side. And yeah, big win for Drexel Hill. And pretty much so, like you said, stamped her position in the Kentucky Oaks starting gate if she wants to go. Now, granted, the Busher, just as the Gotham, was a one-turn mile, but still, that effort makes you think she's going to be like coming from off the pace, have no problem going a little bit longer. So she's already done 2 turns before and run pretty well doing it. So I don't think that's going to be a huge hindrance one way or the other. So exciting to see her come up here, get the win for out-of-town connections. But I also have to give a shout out to my North Carolina bred volleyball princess who, ran like heck up on the front end. And she, finished third and I thought put in a really game effort and made everybody from North Carolina very proud for that effort. And, hey, listen, she's a stakes place filly. She won the stakes, the Ruthless before this. And so, she dug in. I mean, once she was headed, she didn't just give up. I mean, she really kind of dug in and fought. So I was pleased by that effort. But, aside from her, it was interesting. I thought, we both talked about a horse like Liam in the Dust getting the blink on. That horse didn't make it to the front. And once that happened, I just kind of thought, okay, well, that's not going to be her day at all, especially when Volleyball Princess was then able to control speed up front.
Yeah, and that's a horse that I never really thought that I would ever want, in the Oaks. I thought in that race that with her speed and the
Yeah,
distance that it was a good fit for her, but when she didn't break, it was over and you learned a bit about her. I mean, before that, we kind of knew we didn't really want a horse like her going 2 turns or in the
yeah,
Oaks or facing pressure, but we learned probably, if she can't get to the front end, she's not going to do any running at all, is what we learned about her there. So probably not going to talk much about her in the future. But I mean, yeah, that definitely kind of concluded that one for me. But
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. No, but exciting stuff there. And now we'll move on. We'll see who comes back in the Gazelle to run up here as our final prep up in New York. But listen, we also had the Gotham, and that was a race very interesting because on paper there was a lot of speed. And
Hmm.
then it turned into a New York turf race for the first quarter mile, where all the jockeys just kind of looked at each other and go, "Oh, I thought you were going to go. Oh, you're not going to go. You want me to go?" And just like somebody go, somebody take the initiative. And of course, it was the out of town jockey, Ray Lu Gutierrez, who was like, something? If nobody else is going to go to the front, I'm going to go to the front with Flood Zone. And that's exactly what he did. Son of a
Hmm.
gun, putting a horse up on the front end really is a good idea at Aqueduct. And so that was one where, again, that early speed dynamic, you really thought there were going to be a few horses pressing,
Hmm.
and it just didn't materialize. And
No.
Flood Zone just kind of easily got to the front and set
Hmm.
relatively moderate fractions. Sand Devil sitting second and then turning for home. It really was a question of, is Sand Devil good enough? And, I thought Sand Devil acquitted himself well. Given everything that happened, here he is on the inside, Flood Zone on the outside at 17-1, a real big number. And
Hmm.
ultimately, though, Flood Zone just kind of kicked on, and Sand Devil wasn't able to make that final close. But we should say Flood Zone ran a big number, a 98 buyer speed figure. Sand Devil ran a really big number as well, 93 buyer speed figure. So, didn't regress at all here in the Gotham. But big effort by Flood Zone for Brad Cox, first time in the barn.
Definitely, yeah, and I really like the way that the number 9 Jeramond ran as well. I mean,
Yeah,
that was his first time, shipping up here, a move that Chad Brown never really makes, shipping like
yeah,
horse that just broke his maiden sprinting from at Tampa up here. And, I made a move too early taking that horse to on top to win there, but
yeah,
I mean, Lord knows, I mean, how it would have played out if he had somewhere to go. At one point on the rail, he was in a bit of a difficult
yeah,
situation and he ran on well after that. So that was a pretty promising performance in terms of his future aspirations, Jeramond. So that was the horse in there that I would like to take out of that race. But yeah, Flood Zone, I mean, ran a really good race, got up on the front end and had things, sort of easy up there until Sand Devil, I mean, that horse is just a really nice New York bred, and I really
yeah,
hope that we see him run all those stakes races up at Saratoga this summer. He's a really, really nice horse. But yeah,
yeah.
Jeramond is probably the one I'd want out of there personally.
Yeah, I think stretching out that certainly makes a lot of sense. And a horse with so little foundation, like you said, just that 1 6.5 furlong sprint down in Tampa Bay before coming up here. Flood Zone doesn't have a lot of experience either. Just 2 races at Gulfstream Park and was in the Victor
Mhm.
Barboza Jr. barn, transferred to Cox for the first time. Honestly, first time in the Cox barn is usually an angle you want to play. Just in general, it doesn't matter what type of horse you're looking at, and so for those horses to move forward is not that surprising. And Flood Zone, yeah, absolutely did that. But like I said, credit to Raylu, I thought, who really, like I said, looked around those first 100 yards, and you're thinking, well, who's going to go? And
Hmm.
it was obvious Jose didn't necessarily want to go with Sand Devil, and Sacrosanct didn't really fire out the way we thought. And it's just,
Hmm.
yeah. And so Raylu just said, okay, I'll get up there on the front end. And so, it's sometimes a jockey just gets a horse comfortable, especially an inexperienced horse. Get that horse comfortable up on the front end. Don't let him think about it. Like, don't give him too much to do. But yeah, Jeremond, I think you're right, is the one stretching out, more experience. Chad Brown, this horse is going to get better. I mean, that much is obvious.
Hmm. Yeah, and definitely, yeah, like you said, he has Derby pedigree, so it
Yeah,
will be exciting to see, where he goes next and
yeah.
what he could develop into. But yeah, Flood Zone ran a really good race, not to take anything away, and that's a horse that's definitely going to continue to improve as well. So
Absolutely. No, 98 buyer speed figure there for Flood Zone.
yeah,
So yeah, big number there. Absolutely. And you never know if those one turn races, if that translates to two. So maybe this is
yeah,
a horse, going to the Pat Day Mile on the Kentucky Derby Day undercard. Or maybe, Cox points to the Kentucky Derby. We'll see. Cox's Colts have not necessarily popped. I mean, John Hancock is going to be running back in the Tampa Bay Derby. Disco Time is not on the work tab yet, which is a little concerning for that horse. So he's got a lot more fillies. He doesn't have as many colts. So maybe Flood Zone now, moves to the front of the class a little bit with that effort for the Kentucky Derby. But speaking of moving to the front of the class, there is a reason that you have Cody's Wish's hat on. We're going to get to that race in a second. But first, the Davona Dale down at Gulfstream Park. And this was, again, a one-turn mile for the fillies. And just when you think when you think you have a race handicap, you know, the Queen's
yeah.
MG,
It's
Happy Joseph Jr., just, kind of upset the field here. Not at a huge price, but, she was the third choice, but she was, a pretty clear third choice between Ballerina Doro and Lacara. But the Queen's MG, listen, she likes Gulfstream Park. Safi always runs well down there. And she had the inside rail.
yeah.
And, Lacara kind of looks to get her head in front. And the Queen's MG fights back at 9-5 and is able to get the win in the Davona Dale. Now, does not record a particularly big buyer speed figure, only an 80 for this effort.
Mhm.
So that's kind of matching what she usually runs at her best. So interesting race, though.
Yeah, I mean, she kind of just snuck up there on the rail, and obviously that's not really how I saw it playing out. But I mean, Lacara, I just don't think that she was fully cranked there. Her main
Yeah.
goal is the Ashland at Keeneland. She wants to go win a Grade One out there. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I still have a preference towards Lacara after that. I mean, Ballerina Dioro, the track, the pace dynamics, and the track itself, I know didn't really set up for that type of
Yeah.
horse. I thought maybe, I thought it was going to be between her and Lacara, and I was trying to take her at a better price. But
Yeah.
yeah, the Queen's MG really snuck up on the rail there. I put her third. I didn't expect her to run out of it, but
Yeah.
she's not as good as Lacara, in my opinion. And yeah, I mean, that horse also comes from a family of sprinters as well. The
Yeah.
Dan side, it's a lot of sprinters. I mean, that's not a horse that I want to take out of there. I definitely am still on Lacara out of that race. And, she wasn't fully cranked. They're definitely saving her best for the Ashland. So, and then Ballerina Dioro, I mean, that was her first start off a long layoff, and she's been working
Yeah.
really well up to it, but the dynamics just didn't really set up in her favor. So I didn't really learn anything too negative about her there.
Yeah.
I have 10th still, or she moved down a little, just sitting in 10th. I like to see her run again,
Yeah.
after that long layoff, and see if she can get a better setup next time. But yeah,
Yeah. I think
credit
that,
to the Queen's MG, ran a good race for sure.
yeah, she
But
did.
yeah.
No, she did. She ran a big race, and I think you're right about, certainly Ballerina Doro is going to get better the longer they go. Presumably, also get better with a little bit more pace in front of her,
Hmm.
get a little bit better going two turns. All of these things are going to help
Yeah.
Ballerina Doro, I think, moving forward. And remember, this is a horse that started her career in the turf. And the only reason she went to the dirt was because Chad Brown said she had been training so well over the dirt that he felt like she earned a shot in her previous start, which she ran second to Muhima in that
Hmm.
Demoiselle, and made up a ton of ground late in that race. So she's one who's going to come running late. That's just her style. Now, as far as Lacara, one of the things we should mention, remember, she's coming out of that Suncoast Stakes where
Yeah.
her last blew the break, and Lucara just inherited this incredibly easy lead. And I think it might have been a little misleading that, to your point, she wasn't probably fully cranked for that Suncoast, but things just kind of worked out that way. And it wasn't really the strongest field after her and her laugh. And once her laugh didn't break, that was kind of the end of the race. And Lucara just kind of inherited a lead and was able to kind of milk it on the front end. This time doing a one turn, cutting back. You have a local horse like the Queen's MG who, ran well up in Saratoga, we saw, but also clearly likes it down in South Florida. And you figure, Mark Cassie's going to get this one more focused on the Ashland coming up at Keeneland and things like that. So you don't want these horses cranked too soon. And particularly in the case of Lucara, she's already secured her spot in the starting gate of the Kentucky Oaks. There's no reason for her to run her best race in the Davona Dale. So let her continue to get better gradually. And Mark Cassie always kind of takes the long road in that approach. But that was kind of the precursor to what was the big race, at least in your eyes, of the weekend, and Sovereignty taking on River Thames, taking on Burnham Square, taking on the local horse Neo Equos. It was quite a race. Kaylie, I'm just going to let you kind of talk. What was your level of anticipation and excitement before this race even started?
Oh, I was so excited. I mean, I was standing in front of the TV like 10 minutes before they went into the gate, just like this, like right underneath the TV, waiting and placing bets. I mean, he was like at 4-1 at one point, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing for me. Then, even when he floated down to 3-1, I hit him again to win. So definitely was so excited. I mean, going into the race, I know clearly you guys know I really like Bill Mott. Don't think that I just pick his horses like because they're Bill Mott horses. I mean, for example, Bold Journey ran on the Aqueduct card that same day, and I didn't pick that horse in my top 3 or 4, and I don't even think he ran 4th there. So there's,
he did not. He ran 5th. Yeah.
I don't pick them all the time, but definitely. And I knew, the short stretch at Gulfstream, speed favoring track, but I just believe he's superior. Like, in my opinion, he's just superior to those horses. Bill Mott's good off a layoff, especially at Gulfstream. And he definitely didn't have him fully cranked there either, which is really scary if you think about it.
That's the thing is, going down the backside of that race, I mean, it's funny. I mean, the break takes place. Everybody kind of gets to where they want to go. Maybe the only one that was a little bit of a surprise was Gate to Wire didn't press the pace a little bit more from the inside rail. That horse kind of sat more of a mid-pack trip. But otherwise, everybody's in their spot. River Thames is tracking. Neo Equus is on the lead. Burnham Square is mid-pack. Sovereignty's kind of in his spot in the back of the field. But there was a moment in the backstretch where you're thinking, is this like an East Avenue situation? Is this horse going to fire? Because we saw East Avenue. Now, granted, East Avenue was more of a front-end horse and then just kind of dropped back in that Risen Star. But you go, man, is he going to fire off the bench? And then all of a sudden, around the turn, Junior Alvarado starts picking horses off. And then it's just a matter of whether he's going to be able to get there. And you see him up on the screen now coming with those Godolphin blue silks around the turn. Neo Equus on the front end. River Thames in the white silks takes the lead here. And like you said, it's a short stretch and just a matter of whether or not Sovereignty can get up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as soon as I saw him poke around the turn, put his head out, and he had his ears up, I knew he was going to get there. And it really just kept my dream alive there. There was a moment that I was a little concerned, but I mean, the way that horse finished up, and not only that, on the gallop out, just dominant. It's, Burnham Square is still finishing. Like, that horse really just smoked that entire field. And River Thames is a really nice horse. So for that, for Sovereignty to catch him the way he did with, everything up against him that day. I mean, not even being biased, that's the horse that I want going into the Derby right now, besides maybe journalism. I mean, which 2 horses have we seen overcome things and win races in that way? That was just exhilarating. I mean,
well, and the last couple
whole night after that race. So.
No, and the thing is, the last several years we've seen that pace in the Kentucky Derby get too hot up front. What happens? Everybody, you want horses coming from off the pace, whether it's a Rich Strike, whether it's a Mage. Even last year, Mystic Dan sat, more of a tracking trip, but still was behind the early pace dynamics. Also saved every single inch of ground on that track. But the other 2, Forever Young and Sierra Leone, were closing from much further back in that race. So you want to have a horse that can kind of show that versatility of coming from off the pace, navigating traffic, being able to go wide, not having that be an issue. And so, yeah, he checks a lot of boxes. Now, I think a critic could say, listen, the two horses he beat were sprinters that were stretching out for the first time, and maybe a mile and a 16th isn't necessarily what, that last 50 yards, you could start to tell River Thames maybe was tiring a little bit. Also, it's interesting. Todd Pletcher gave an interview to Ehantis 305 after the race, and he said River Thames started looking at the screen on the infield at Gulfstream Park. He goes, there's still a lot of greenness with this horse. And he kind of lost concentration. His ears started flickering. His left ear in particular started just kind of looking around. And I think, maybe Johnny Velasquez thought he could get there and he just couldn't. So that is a nice horse. And I'd imagine we're going to see that horse run again, maybe in the Florida Derby, maybe up here in the Wood Memorial, probably down in the Florida Derby though. But still, I think it was a really good effort off the bench for Sovereignty to make that run in a short stretch. I think is really impressive.
And yeah, you just see the way that he finished up and just smoked them all on the gallop out. I mean, any extra distance, anything, it's all going to be in this horse's favor, as opposed to horses that, might be faster, but they tire. Especially, the way that he overcame every obstacle in his way was really impressive. And I mean, that's just the best team ever. Bill Mott, Junior Alvarado, Godolphin.
Yeah.
So
they know how to win.
Have a really, you can tell by people's demeanor when they stand around horses. How you can tell they know they have something really special.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be honest, our colleague Darwin Vizcaya, I remember he came up to me this summer before Sovereignty ever debuted, and he came up to me and he said, Junior is working. He was talking to his junior in the morning. He goes, Junior's working a Mott horse, Sovereignty. He goes, he thinks he's the best horse Mott has. And I said, okay. Well, I said, put that one in the back of your, that one in the back of your head and remember to bring that back out. And so, yeah, I mean, there's always been big expectations with this horse. Physically, he's impressive, and certainly was very impressive on the track. Earned a 95 Beyer speed figure. It was originally a 98. They recalculated because Gulfstream Park had changed the amount of distance in their run-up to when timing starts. So with that change in calculations, it was downgraded to a 95. Same thing for River Thames, which actually puts him right on par with where he had been running, basically. So that was good to see, and that was a new career high off the bench for Sovereignty. So again, very encouraging to see those efforts. But some might say that was the appetizer, because what we saw out at Santa Anita later that night, oh boy, I texted you a video of journalism the day before, schooling in the paddock, and I said, this horse is a problem. This horse is a monster. And we got the showdown we wanted, Barnes versus journalism. And, that was a race that played out kind of the way we thought it would. Journalism got to the front end. Rodriguez flanked off of him. Typical Bob Baffert move of letting one of them get to the front. The other one sits in a stalking trip. Journalism sitting a little further back, which is what he wants to do. And coming for home, they hit the top of the stretch and Barnes is in front, and you think maybe Barnes can kick on here. And journalism for Michael McCarthy with Umberto Rispoli just keeps getting stronger down the stretch and just it overtakes Barnes without really any hesitation. Sometimes you see horses delay for a second when they go by another horse. There was no delay right there. Journalism just went right by and won the San Felipe in really impressive fashion. Long way back to Rodriguez in third. Hopefully we can stop talking about that horse as a Derby prospect. But, those top two put on quite a show there out in California.
Absolutely. I mean, journalism especially. I could not believe when I saw that horse come fly by Barnes like that. I mean, but not to take a lot away from Barnes. I mean, he's going to be still a horse that's going to be talked about a lot on the Derby trail. And, in the Derby too, he didn't do anything necessarily wrong there. He just met a horse that is either way better or better on that day. But, all credit to journalism. That was definitely the most impressive performance I'd say of the weekend. And Barnes definitely is still a nice horse, but he's never going to get away with things all his own way on the front end in the Derby. So that kind of showed you a little bit more about that one in there.
I think so. I think that's the issue because I've seen some people make first of all, journalism earns a 108 buyer speed figure, which is now that magnitude is off the Derby Trail. I think magnitude was maybe a 106, maybe it was a 108 as well, but for the Risen Star, but he's off the trail. That's the highest speed figure we have right now. It's higher than Colloquial's number. It's higher. It's the highest speed figure of this 3-year-old group that's still running,
Mhm.
and Barnes runs a 105. Now I saw some people go, well, listen, Barnes ran the second best figure of the weekend. Yes, that's absolutely true. I would also say that was at a mile and an eighth or a mile and a 16th, and he had things his own way on a speed favoring track. It's hard for me to think that that was the first time Barnes went 2 turns. Maybe this horse is going to get more foundation, going to get a little bit more experience. Like you said, maybe any given Saturday you could move forward. Maybe journalism just felt particularly good that day. The journalism
Yeah.
was a horse we had a sneaking suspicion was going to be a
Mhm.
monster out there. The pedigree is
And
all
mhm.
distance with this horse. And Barnes, listen, I know it's the same thing with Sovereignty, although I think the Sovereignty's dam side is a little bit more built on foundation and distance. I always worry about the end of mischiefs getting 10 furlongs. That's always the concern. And so these races are going to get longer. They're going to get more contested on the front end. And if he's tiring at a mile and a 16th and being overtaken by journalism, I have a hard time thinking suddenly this is going to reverse course when the waters get deeper, going a mile and an eighth and a mile and a quarter. So I still have Barnes in my top 10. I'm
Yeah.
not dropping him out. It was still, if journalism hadn't been in there, we'd have talked about how easily Barnes dispatched that field. But bottom line,
Yeah.
journalism is in the field and he's not getting away from him.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I don't think Bob Baffert's sitting there like, oh, damn. I mean, I guess this horse, really,
Right.
that's it for him. I mean, if we put him up on the front end, like he's just going to get caught. So let's just, try, I guess, that way and see what
Yeah.
happens. Like he's probably going back to the drawing board and is going to figure out, what to do with this horse after that, especially knowing that he's going to be facing journalism,
Yeah.
in either the last prep or the last couple of preps and
Yeah.
definitely in the Derby. So I'm not counting, like you said, Barnes out. Journalism was just dominant that day. And just a beautiful, physically impressive horse as well, and pedigree. He's made to do this. So yeah, I like journalism a lot, but I'd imagine Baffert's going back to the drawing board and trying to re-strategize some things with that big purchase of Barnes, and clearly a horse that does have a ton of talent.
Oh, for sure. There's loads of
Yeah.
talent there, and that horse is going to win a lot of races. And it's also important to point out Barnes had won his debut by sitting off the pace a little bit, so he can pass horses. He's not a horse that needs a lead necessarily. They just put him up there to see kind of maybe what would happen. So it's not as if he's a one-trick pony by any stretch. So I think that is an important thing to point out.
Mhm.
Um, listen, journalism is a big-time horse. And what I'll say this one other thing I will mention before we move on to the Santa Ysabel is several years ago, I was all the way out on a horse named Medina Spirit. Why? Because Medina Spirit couldn't get within shouting distance of Life is Good out west. And I thought, well, how good can this Medina Spirit be if if he can't get within a couple of lengths of Life is Good? Well, it turns out Life is Good was just a monster. And then, oh, by the way, Life is Good missed the Triple Crown Trail and had that long layoff. And suddenly Medina Spirit crosses the wire first in the Kentucky Derby. It turns out Medina Spirit was a pretty good horse. So, again, you never know what happens. You got to see, you got to wait to see how all this plays out, especially with these 3-year-olds. You never know, if a horse has a little setback or anything like that. Suddenly now things get rejostled in those positions. So we'll just have to wait and see. But that was quite the display. And those two put on quite a show. And it'll be interesting to see if anybody can touch some of these California horses because journalism
Yeah.
and then Baffert's got a couple of others that we're going to talk about later. But yeah, it's impressive.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, Locked. I mean, I know it's not a
Oh,
Derby horse, but wow, I think we have to mention, Locke's performance that day. Wow.
insane.
I've not like my jaw like was on the floor. And I know I say that probably too much, but no, like that finish had like chills up my arms. I mean, that horse just looks so good. And
I
I'd say I'm just excited for the older division as I am
yeah,
for this division as well. So just wanted to mention that.
100%. Could not agree more. And I saw some people go, well, he didn't beat much of a field. Express Train, older horse, hit show, grade 2, grade 3. It's not even so much who he beat, it's
The
how
way
he
he
did
did
it.
it. Yeah.
That's the thing, is he just went 4 wide. I mean, Jose
Yeah.
Ortiz had this horse parked 4 wide around both turns, going 1.25 miles, and he just breezes by without any concern.
Hmm.
And just opens up on Express Train. He ran a huge race, I thought. And Hit Show, who's a multiple graded stakes winning horse. I mean, that's not a. So it was visually very impressive effort, and
Yeah.
earned a 109 buyer speed figure. Like you, I'm excited for this summer at Saratoga because you got Mindframe who's back, you got Fierceness who's training,
Just
you
a
got Sierra Leone
touch.
who's training, you got Locked who's doing this. It's going to be a fun summer for sure.
Yeah. And Just a
Uh,
touch that same day.
oh yeah, Just a Touch. You're right, down at the fairgrounds. Yeah, yeah.
Ran
No, that horse
huge.
ran it. Yeah,
Mhm.
1 by 10 or something like that, completely wrapped up. So yeah, for the first time in a while, we're excited about the older handicap division. Thank God. So listen, we closed out the weekend with the Santa Ysabel, and this one had a notable scratch of Cipriani for Bob Baffert, who was your second choice in the morning line at 5-2. And that was a filly you and I are both really high on. I reached out to our mutual friend Ryan Anderson. I said, Ryan, any word on why this horse scratched? And I just heard a text from him right before we started recording. He goes, I haven't heard anything one way or the other about whether this horse was pointing towards another race or if there was a vet scratch or whatever the case might have been. But because that field was reduced to only 4 horses, it also was reduced in terms of points for the Kentucky Oaks. So the winner only got 25 points. Everything got reduced by 50%. That said, the top 2 still put on a heck of a show. Super Speed and Maysam had a stretch duel that was really exciting coming down the stretch. And for Maysam, this was a huge bounce back effort from that Sunland Park Oaks last time out.
Yeah, and you'd imagine, I mean, that that Baffert decided to run her back here because clearly she had something click in between the last race and now we know why the
Yeah.
jockeys were listed why they were. But
Yeah.
this super speed horse was the one that I was the most concerned about going up against Cipriani. I mean, that horse was running huge figures on the turf, and clearly her form translated to the dirt. So
Yeah.
that's a very nice horse. So I thought that the way Mason, fought to get that win was pretty impressive. I mean, I don't know why Cipriani scratched. She just put in a huge work before this. I'd
Yeah.
imagine Bob really had this Mason ready to go and wanted to get her some points to get in the starting gate. So, wow, the way that she improved. I mean, I don't know if
Yeah.
she's how she stacks up with this
Yeah.
larger group of fillies on the Oaks Trail, but I mean, I put her on my list just to see how she,
Yeah.
continues on after that. I was pretty impressed by the way that she did that under pressure, especially.
Yeah. Absolutely. As of the time of recording this, which is about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, there's still no buyer speed figure yet for that race that was run on Sunday
Mhm.
for Mason or Super Speed. So we don't really have context yet, but visually it looked like a little bit of a stronger effort than what we saw from the Queen's MG and
Mhm.
Drexel Hill, who ran at 80 and 79 respectively. So I think that number is going to come back a little bit faster. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, we'll see what the deal is with Cipriani. But the other thing Bob mentioned was, and I think you're right about him wanting to get this horse the points necessary for the Kentucky Oaks because he had mentioned everything was fine at Sunland Park, and then something agitated her right before she got into the gate,
Yeah,
and he said she got all sorts of worked up, and she broke terribly. He goes, it just everything fell apart, and she didn't feel like doing any running, but it was all because she got agitated before she even got into the gate.
yeah.
And so it's one of those things where he brought her back on less than 2 weeks rest, which is not a common move for him in these types of prep races. And basically, he knew she had a big race in her because he had her ready for the Sunland
Mhm.
Park Oaks. Runs her back 2 weeks later. She runs a big race, and you're right. Super Speed with Flavian Pride aboard. Clearly, the turf to dirt transition is not an issue. So that one ran a big race, and we'll see what the speed figures come back. But it's going to be interesting to see who ends up running in the Santa Anita Oaks versus who goes and ships to Oaklawn for the fantasy. You'd imagine Tenma
Mhm.
is probably going to be pointed out in that direction. So going to be interesting to see the musical chairs taking place out west for some of these preps.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note, I mean, Baffert has the 2 nicest game winners out there. Like,
It's true.
I mean,
Yeah.
unless anyone can name, like, more game winners, maybe I'm missing, but I think he has the only 2, like, nice ones, or at least, ones that have done a lot of running in
The ones that have done the
gaming.
running.
Yeah, in gaming and Maysam. So
Yeah.
that's also pretty interesting. I know that they bought them both from the 2-year-old sale, and those were the
Yeah.
only game winners that they bought. So I just
Yeah.
thought that was pretty interesting as well.
No, that is interesting. That is interesting. So, but speaking of interesting, let's dive into our new standings for the Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks in terms of the point standings. This is where things stand as of the week of March 3rd. And you have Coal Battle up top with Citizen Bull and Sovereignty and Flood Zone and Journalism. Now, all pretty much so guaranteed a spot in the starting gate of the Kentucky Derby. 47.5 points for Journalism, more than enough, historically speaking, to get into the starting gate. And I would imagine he's going to accumulate quite a bit more. But then Getaway Car at 36, Built at 35. Again, those are two horses that you really don't need to do much more, if anything. I mean, sometimes that's enough to get you in the starting gate. But really, just a minor placing in one of these final 100-point prep races will be more than enough for them to both stamp their spot in there. And then you have some more like Matticat Road, Burnham Square, Sandman. Again, minor placings in these final series of preps is going to be more than enough for them to at least qualify to get into the Kentucky Derby and that starting gate. So we'll just have to wait and see. It is interesting. There are some horses that have yet to even run a Kentucky Derby prep race. Cornucopian, Grande, Disruptor, a couple of names that I'm going to mention a little bit later, but all three of those horses are going to be running in the 100-point prep races. So maybe somebody jumps up to the top here in this final round of preps, but that's kind of how things shake out on the boys' side. On the girls' side, not a lot of change. Quiet side still up there. Drexel Hill obviously popping up because of that big win in the Busher. Lacara, Good Cheer, Queens MG now making an appearance. But otherwise, you have a lot of familiar names: Tenma, 5G, Muhima. Amarth moves up there a little bit, and Maysam now moves up as well. But the top of these lists feels a little bit more solidified, and you're getting a clear picture of who's going to be in these two races.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, quiet side on top. Obviously, nothing changes there, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'd say that these are a lot of your main players. I mean, I don't know. You're going to see it change a bit. There's a few on each that I wouldn't really take into the either, but yeah, they're just the
Sure.
points. So we'll definitely see
Yeah.
it change.
No,
But yeah.
absolutely. And I think that's a good point you bring up, Kaylie, which is, the points here are it's just that. It's just points. And ultimately it's going to come down to the connections and how these horses
Mhm.
run their final round of preps.
Mhm.
Because if a horse just doesn't fire at 9 furlongs, and I'll use a horse, I'll just pick on a horse here, not to pick on the horse, or make a negative statement about this. But let's say a horse like Getaway Car runs fifth in the Santa Anita Derby. Now, a horse would qualify probably for the starting gate. Is Bob really going to put that horse in the starting gate of the Kentucky Derby if
Mhm.
that horse is a distance fifth in the Santa Anita Derby? Probably not. And so that's where suddenly, yes, horses might have the requisite number of points and finish in the top 20 to earn their spot in the starting gate. But a lot of times these connections know, hey, based off how they handled 9 furlongs, they're not going to get 10. And this horse is maybe more of a miler. This horse is maybe more of a sprinter, whatever. Maybe this horse is just particularly precocious, too, and accumulated a lot of points, whatever the case might be. They're going to take some of these horses off. So the leaderboard is always in flux, even after the final round of preps, because that's when you start to hear the connections go, well, we're going to probably point to something else. We're going to focus on the Preakness. How many times have we seen Chad Brown do that? He'll have a horse that qualifies and he goes, we're skipping the Derby. We're going to the Preakness instead. He did that with early voting, right? So he's done that with other horses. So something to just keep in mind there as we look at those standings. But the more important standings, Kaylie, are our standings. And the Derby and Oaks top 10, you can see kind of how we have things ranked. For me, Journalism was number 2 last week, obviously moves up to number 1 with a bullet. Sovereignty moves into that number 2 slot after that dominant win in the Fountain of Youth. I think those are the two horses that really have put quite a punctuation mark on a big weekend. And Citizen Bull is a horse that just keeps sitting there and just keeps winning, and it's hard to kind of discount him at this point. I've moved a horse like Sandman up quite a bit just because despite the frustrating efforts from that horse, I still think on the first Saturday in May, he's going to be a horse that you don't want to contend with. I
Mhm.
think I still have a very high opinion of him for as long as he gets into the race, which I think he will. And then what's interesting is a couple of horses that I'll just very quickly shout out because a lot of these other names have been on here before. Cornucopian and Disruptor. These are both first out, or I shouldn't say first out, but these are both last out maiden winners. Cornucopian winning in debut on the Rebel Stakes undercard for Bob Baffert. I think that horse comes back after running a 101 Beyer speed figure and likely goes to the Arkansas Derby. And that horse looked really impressive. And then Disruptor, $1.15 million son of Gunrunner for Todd Pletcher, who lost in debut but came back and absolutely crushed a maiden field on the Fountain of Youth Day undercard and is clearly going to be pointed to either the Florida Derby or the Wood Memorial. Seems like the Florida Derby, which is going to be an ambitious spotting for Pletcher, but that one's got a ton of talent as well. So those are some of my 10. But Kaylie, interested in hearing about your 10. Didn't change too much up top, but you did move some horses around.
Yeah, I just kept, my top three are pretty solid. Those are my three favorite fillies right now, like
Yeah.
on this trail. I mean, I love those three fillies. I'd be comfortable riding with either three of them if they're in the starting gate come Oaks Day. And then underneath, I left Lacara the same, her as well. I'm excited to see her run in the Ashland. I mean, that's her main goal. So I'm excited to see, how she stocks up there. And then Cipriani, I mean, with the lack of news and information regarding her, I'm just going to choose to believe right now that, she has another race in mind and that
Yeah.
they wanted Maysam to get some points. But if I hear differently,
Yeah.
obviously I'll adjust. And then yeah, the bottom of my list stayed about the same. I added Maysam there.
Yeah.
I put her just one notch above Ballerina d'Oro. Nothing against that horse. I mean, it's just, I guess the recency of the performances this weekend made me go that
Sure.
way. But yeah, my list pretty much stayed about the same. And oh, the one thing that did change is I took Scottish Lassie off there
Oh,
because
yeah.
I just haven't seen any works recorded since, like, the work pattern is just a little bit odd, so I'm just
Yeah.
gonna track that a little bit. And then the Amarth filly,
Yeah.
that ran at Aqueduct, that's one I'm definitely gonna keep my eye on for the future.
Yeah, I think her and Drexel Hill are going to be interesting ones to keep an eye on. Like you
Yeah.
said, to see, leading up to that Gazelle or the kind of the 100-point preps, that'll be interesting. I should mention Disco Time is a horse that I had in my top 10. I dropped out because much like you with Scottish Lassie, the horse is not on the work tab right now. So hard to kind of give that horse a spot on my top 10. But interested, Kaylie, Cornucopian Disruptor, last out maiden winners, that's going to be a tall task. I mean, we did see a horse like Mage a couple years ago basically go, maiden special weight, fountain, Florida Derby, or I guess Holy Bull, Florida Derby, and Kentucky Derby pretty quickly. But still, to go from the maiden ranks to suddenly running in a grade one next time out to potentially the Kentucky Derby. But those two both look really, really talented.
Yeah, of course they do. I'm excited to see. I mean, run that a figure that high on debut, you'd imagine that they could stack up against these types of horses, but I guess we'll see. I mean, I
Yeah.
definitely have high hopes for the both of them, but like you said, it is, a tall task jumping in on the trail now. And a lot of these horses have a lot of experience under their belt, but they might just be that good. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to see.
They might be. And I think that goes to the fact that there hasn't been this overwhelming, we just saw journalism and Barnes and sovereignty. And I mean, okay, so those three, yeah, they ran some big numbers. But really, when you look beyond that, not a lot of huge numbers are being run that are that intimidating. And as a result, I think it gives confidence to last out maiden winners. Hey, if you ran a really big number in debut, maybe you can stretch out a little bit longer and jump up and hey, maybe you're just peaking at the right time. And again, so much of the Kentucky Derby is peaking at the right time. So something to keep in mind. And looking ahead to this coming week, only one prep race. There's actually no Oaks prep this week at Tampa Bay Downs. The only prep race is the Tampa Bay Derby, which is worth 50 points at Tampa Bay Downs, going a mile and a 16th. Fingers crossed that it's going to be a wagering event. Last year, if you remember, that was a bit of a disaster with the tote going down or communication going down. And I felt terrible for the people at Tampa Bay Downs on their big day. I used to go to the track down there a lot when I lived in Florida. And so didn't like seeing that. But hopefully everything goes off seamlessly on Saturday. Our own Acacia Clement will be there for America's Day at the Races. So you definitely want to tune in to that coverage. But this marks the return of a horse that you really liked last year, Kaylie, which is Chancer McPatrick. Is coming back for Chad Brown in the Tampa Bay Derby. So that's going to be fun to see Chancer and to see, did he get bigger as a 3-year-old?
Mm-hmm.
And, anybody who remembers, he's got that huge late running style. I wonder if he's any more forward as a 3-year-old, if he's any quicker out of the gate, if he's adopted maybe a slightly different running style. We're going to find out on Saturday, though.
Yeah, that's going to be super exciting to see how this horse grew. Maybe if any dynamics change up. I mean, based on how he was running, with his style, I don't know why they would, but who knows? It'll be really,
Yeah.
really exciting to see. So yeah, Chancer's return is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it will be. And also, Owen Almighty is geared towards that race. And I'll give you another horse that it looks like it's going to be pointed towards this race, who is now in the Chad Brown barn as well, which is Uphill Road. If you remember, that's the horse that finished third in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. This was a horse that came over from Europe and ran third in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. And if you go back and look at the running lines, he was the only horse in that race that made up a massive amount of ground late. That horse went from dead last to third in that race. That horse has some talent. And now he's in Chad's barn, and Chad's putting him in this Tampa Bay Derby. So that's going to be interesting too, to see if you potentially have two horses that are both closers, like Chancer and Uphill Road, making a late kick there at Tampa Bay. So although I did think Chad said he's putting the blinkers on Uphill Road, so that might mean a horse was maybe a little bit more prominently placed early in that race. But going to be interesting. And then I put it up here for the following week just to let people know we have a new prep, the Virginia Derby and the Virginia Oaks. Now, those are not new races. I lived in Virginia for a long time, used to go down to Colonial. Virginia Derby, Virginia Oaks, one of the more fun days to have in the fall down at Colonial Downs. They have moved, though. They've become dirt races. They used to be turf races. They're now dirt races. They are being run in the spring for a very special 3-day meet at Colonial Downs. 50-point prep races. Something to keep in mind, they are one-turn races because that track at Colonial is massive. That turf course is huge. And so as a result, it just pushes the dirt course out that much more. So it will be really interesting to see Colonial host this first round, this inaugural prep for them. And 50 points, we'll have to see who ends up pointing there, but should be a lot of fun. So we got a big week ahead of us. We're going to be back here later in the week as Kaylie and I are going to be previewing that Tampa Bay Derby, talking a little bit more about Chancer, talking about some of the other contenders in that race. But Kaylie, the fun is just starting, and I feel like the road, I can see the finish line now. I can see the finish line. I can almost smell the roses, but we're getting there.
Yeah, things are moving so fast. Like, really, I cannot believe, that it's already March. So we're really getting there. We only have about, 2 months. So things are getting
We really
close.
just have a month until the last preps are over. The beginning of April
Yeah.
is that last round of preps, basically. So we got a month. It feels like yesterday we were talking about the Jerome. Now time flies by. So going to be a lot of fun. But appreciate everybody here tuning in. Make sure to press that like button and subscribe to NYRA Bets YouTube today. For Kaylie Shapiro, my name is Matthew DeSantis. Wishing you a great and profitable day at the races. And reminding you, friends, it's now post time.